In the field of history, sources are very significant. Without it, the reconstruction of the past will be impossible. A source, by definition, is one that provides information. In the case of history, it is divided into two: the primary and the secondary sources. Primary sources are the testimonies of eyewitnesses or participants. Artifacts or objects are also considered as such. These sources are those that are contemporaneous with or present during the time period under study. Types of primary sources are generally divided into three: documents, creative works, and relics or artifacts. In order to better understand these sources, specific examples of the following are as follows. For the documents, there are diaries, speeches, manuscripts, letters, interviews, official records, and the like. For creative works, examples are poems, dramas, novels, music, and art. And lastly, some examples for the artifacts or relics are potteries, furniture, clothing, and buildings. Historians and students of history would like to work with primary sources in order to comprehend the past on its own terms. This gives the students the opportunity to create an analysis and interpret the past from what they've read, saw, and heard. In contrast to primary sources, which revolve on what the eyewitnesses perceived, secondary sources are those that are already interpreted based on primary sources. In addition, it may also include pictures, quotes, and graphics from primary sources. Secondary sources are often removed from the event in question. This is due to the fact that it was not made firsthand by someone who had participation in the historical event in question. Having said this, it generally offers a different perspective compared with primary sources. This removes the students from interpreting the primary source and exposes them to the author's interpretation, opinions, and analysis. Some examples of secondary sources are the following: textbooks, journal articles which interprets previous research, criticisms, commentaries, annotations, and encyclopedias. Both sources are equally important for the student of history. While the secondary sources aid in situating the context and acquiring background knowledge of the historical event in question, primary sources provide an account or testimony on how the historical event itself unraveled. Moreover, students will have an opportunity to interpret a source based on their own understanding. There will be no right or wrong interpretation, only valid or invalid, which is based on how close to the facts did the interpretation was done. Determining the merit of a source is done through historical criticism. Not all sources should be taken as it is. Rather, the student of history must carefully examine and evaluate them. Basic matters about its form and content must be settled first before it can be used as historical evidence. Historical criticism is done through external and internal evaluation. The former deals with a source's authenticity, while the latter tackles its credibility. External evaluation or criticism revolves around a source's authenticity. This means that through this type of criticism or evaluation, the student will be able to determine if the source is forged, faked, or fabricated, a hoax, or a misinterpretation. Focus on the authenticity of the document. The student of history will be determining factors such as the date, the author's handwriting and signature, and his or her inconsistencies or anachronism in the use of grammar, idioms, punctuations, orthography, and reference to the events. In addition, the provenance or its origin is also to be determined. Lastly, the semantics or the meaning of words and phrases should also be identified along with the source's clearness in meaning or ambiguity. On the other hand, internal evaluation tackles a source's credibility by identifying the author in order to determine his reliability, mental processes, personal attitudes, and his ability and willingness to tell the truth. Also, through the corroboration of historical facts, such as independent testimonies of more than two reliable sources, the credibility of the source in question could now be determined. The student of history must not take a source as it is. Much like in the contemporary time, one must analyze, examine, and evaluate information before subscribing to its ideas. In doing so, the student of history will develop critical thinking and analytical skills, which will eventually aid them in the assessment of primary sources in reconstructing the history of the Filipino people.